My name is Madeline Carter and I turned 16 today. And on the morning that was supposed to mean something, my dad flipped a $1 bill at my chest like he was swatting away a fly. "Get out," he said. "I'm done paying for a useless mistake." The bill hit the floor between us. For a second he waited like he expected me to cry, to beg him to take it back. But I didn't. I bent down, picked up that wrinkled dollar, and folded it between my fingers. Then I looked him straight in the eye and smiled. I'd been waiting years for him to say those exact words. I pulled a sealed envelope from the inside of my hoodie and placed it on the counter in front of him. He didn't even hide his irritation. "What's this supposed to be?" he muttered. "Go ahead," I said. "Open it." He tore the flap, skimmed the first page, and the color drained from his face so fast I thought he might faint. His hand started trembling. He flipped to the next document, then the next, each one worse for him than the last. "Where did you get this?" he whispered. I didn't answer. I just tilted my head toward the window. He followed my eyes, and the second he saw what or who was standing outside, his breath caught in his throat. And that was the moment everything in our house finally shifted. If you're watching this right now, tell me where you're tuning in from and what time it is there. And if anything like this has ever happened to you even once, type same in the comments. I read every single one. 8 years earlier, when I was 8, everything changed in a way I was too young to understand. That morning, a caseworker had driven me across 3 hours of highway into a quiet suburb in northern Ohio, the place she said would be my new start. My mother had passed away after a long illness, and whatever connection I had with my biological father had disappeared years before. I remember sitting in the back seat clutching a backpack, with 2 shirts, a worn jacket, and a tiny picture of my mom. When the car stopped in front of the Carter house, I didn't know this was the last moment I'd feel anything close to safe for a long time. Gerald Carter and Elaine Carter stood on the porch smiling like they had rehearsed it. Gerald shook the caseworker's hand. Elaine knelt to my level with a gentle voice. And for a moment, I believed them when they said everything would be okay. They showed me the bedroom upstairs, painted light yellow, and told me it was mine. Elaine braided my hair for school, packed my lunches, and walked me to the bus stop the first week. Gerald asked about my homework at dinner. At 8, those things felt like love, and I held on to them tightly. The first year at my new school in Ohio wasn't perfect, but it was calm. I made one friend learn the routine and tried my hardest to be the kind of kid who caused no trouble. But things in the Carter house shifted the moment Evan Carter was born. The day Elaine came home from the hospital with him, the entire atmosphere changed. Suddenly, the gentle tone in her voice never returned. The smiles were shorter, and every conversation revolved around Evan. A few months after his arrival, Gerald said they needed the yellow room for the baby and moved me into the small spare room at the end of the hallway. It barely fit a mattress and a dresser. Elaine apologized, but her eyes didn't match her words. By the time I turned 9, the small things that made me feel included were gone. Evan received new toys every month. I got whatever was left in the closet. His meals were carefully plated. Mine were whatever they didn't finish. Elaine decorated the house for his first birthday with balloons covering every corner. My 9th birthday passed without anyone mentioning it. I sat on the edge of my small bed waiting for some sign they remembered, but the house stayed quiet except for Evan crying down the hall. I learned to stop expecting anything after that. The older Evan got, the clearer everything became. Gerald praised him for the smallest things, but when I brought home good grades, he barely looked up. If I asked for a new jacket because mine was too small, Gerald would say, "You're lucky to be in this house, Madeline. Don't ask for what you don't need." That sentence stayed with me longer than he ever knew. Even at 8, 9, 10 years old, I felt something tightening inside my chest every time he said it, like a reminder that I didn't really belong. I tried to ignore it, tried to convince myself I was imagining the distance growing between us, but deep down I knew the truth. I was there because they needed something from me not because they wanted me, and that feeling never left me again. One evening, something shifted in a way I couldn't ignore. I was walking past Gerald's office on my way to the kitchen when I heard my name said in a tone that made my steps freeze. The door was cracked just enough for their voices to spill out into the hallway. Gerald sounded irritated, almost angry. As long as she's listed as a child with no legal guardian, he said the state will keep sending the assistance every month. It's free money. They're not going to look into it. I didn't breathe. Elaine lowered her voice, but I still caught the panic trembling through it. But if she ever finds out what you filed, we're done, Gerald. They'll make us pay everything back. And they won't stop at that. You know how these audits work. Gerald scoffed. She's a quiet kid. She doesn't know anything about those forms. Just make sure she doesn't touch anything in here. I didn't understand all of it, but I understood enough to feel something cold slide down my spine. I stepped away from the door quietly and went upstairs before either of them noticed. For days after, I kept turning their words over in my head. Child with no legal guardian. Free money. As long as she doesn't find out. I didn't want to believe they were talking about me, but everything lined up too neatly. I started noticing details I'd never paid attention to before, like the stack of unopened envelopes on Gerald's desk labeled with my name, or the binder he kept locked in the bottom drawer. When Elaine left the study window open one afternoon, a breeze knocked a pile of papers onto the floor. I crouched to pick them up, and that was the first time I saw it clearly, a document with the state seal listing monthly support labeled for my care. The amounts were handwritten, circled, and totaled. None of the numbers made sense compared to my life. I wore the same winter coat for 3 years. My shoes were always too tight by spring. Meanwhile, Evan had a new bike, new video games, and birthday parties that filled the backyard with kids and rented decorations. The next week, a social worker knocked on the door for a scheduled home visit. Elaine's smile snapped into place instantly. Gerald called me into the living room before the woman walked inside. He crouched in front of me, grabbing my shoulders just tight enough to hurt. You answer exactly what I told you before, he said. You're fed, you're taken care of, and you're happy here. Understand? I nodded, because I didn't know what else to do. During the visit, the social worker asked simple questions about school and food, and whether I felt safe. Gerald stood behind her, his eyes fixed on me like a threat. I answered every question the way he rehearsed, almost mechanically. When she left, Gerald didn't say thank you or good job. He just shut the door and walked back to his office as if the whole thing had been an inconvenience. A few days later, while looking for a notebook in the hallway cabinet, I found a manila folder wedged behind a stack of old magazines. Inside was a form with my mother's full name printed at the top. I hadn't seen her handwriting in years, but seeing her name typed like that made my chest tighten. It confirmed what I already suspected. Gerald and Elaine hadn't taken me in because they cared. They took me because I was worth something to them on paper, and the moment I realized that the last bit of childhood I had left vanished. The shift came quietly, starting with something as simple as a teacher pulling me aside after class. My homeroom counselor, Mrs. Collier, had been watching me for months without saying much. She noticed everything: how I wore the same faded jacket even when the weather changed, how I hesitated every time someone raised their voice in the hallway, how I never volunteered for anything that required parents. One Tuesday afternoon, she asked me to stay back for a quick check-in. I tried to brush it off, but she gently insisted. When the room emptied, she pulled a chair beside mine instead of sitting behind her desk. Maddie, she said softly, I've worked with students for a long time. Something's wrong, isn't it? I didn't know how to answer. I couldn't tell her the whole truth. But a small piece slipped out before I could stop it. Things at home aren't great. She didn't push. She just nodded, thanked me for trusting her, and asked if she could schedule a private session later that week. I agreed because something inside me was too tired to keep pretending. During that session, I told her a little more not everything just enough for her expression to shift from concern to alarm. I didn't mention the files or the money or the way Gerald looked at me whenever someone mentioned the state. But I told her about the basement room, about how I never had my own clothes unless they were donated, and how I felt like I didn't belong in that house. When I finished, she let a moment of silence settle before speaking. "I think you need someone who can help you navigate this legally," she said. "Someone who can look into things you shouldn't have to handle alone." That's when she introduced me to Nora Bennett, a child advocacy attorney who volunteered with the district. Nora met me in a small office near the cafeteria, her notebook already open, her tone calm but direct. She asked questions differently than anyone else ever had, sharp, precise, as if she already suspected where the truth was hiding. When I mentioned the envelopes with my name, she froze mid-sentence. "Did you ever see what was inside?" she asked. I shook my head, but Gerald kept them locked away. Her eyes narrowed in a way I'd never seen from an adult before, not angry, just focused. "Maddie, I need your permission to look into something," she said. "It's about state benefits. It might explain what you've been experiencing." I signed a consent form with my initials shaking in the corner of the page. Over the next few weeks, Nora worked quietly, digging through records from the state office, pulling archived forms, cross-checking signatures, retrieving school documentation, and reviewing financial notes connected to my name. She never told me details until she confirmed them, but every time she came back, her expression grew more serious. When she finally sat me down, she placed a thin stack of papers in front of me. "Maddie, your guardians filed you as a child with no legal caregiver. That's how they accessed monthly benefits. And none was spent on you." My stomach twisted because hearing it out loud made everything feel heavier. Nora didn't rush me. She explained the next steps clearly. She was filing the case with family court, pushing for oversight, and preparing a petition for temporary guardianship once I reached 16. "You won't be alone navigating this," she said. "Not anymore." She slid another document toward me and tapped the signature line. "This is your request for future protective guardianship. It doesn't go into effect yet, but it starts the process." I signed it without hesitating. It was the first time in my life I put my name on something that felt like a step forward. Walking out of the school that day, I felt a strange, unfamiliar sensation, like something solid was finally forming under my feet. For the first time, an adult wasn't asking me to stay quiet. Someone was standing with me, not above me. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. The 2 years that followed felt like living behind a one-way mirror. I moved around the house as quietly as possible, careful not to give Gerald any reason to look my way longer than necessary. The more Nora uncovered, the more dangerous it became for me to draw attention, so I perfected the routine of slipping in and out of rooms like a shadow. At school, I blended in, kept my head down, and used every spare minute to prepare for the future I wasn't ready to say out loud. After one meeting with Nora, she explained the timeline calmly. The court would only consider a temporary guardianship hearing once I turned 16. Until then, everything had to stay silent. That meant every document, every note, every printout had to be moved carefully. I couldn't take anything out of the house myself. Gerald kept a close eye on what left and what came back. So I relied on Riley, the one person I trusted completely. She didn't ask questions when I passed her folded papers under the cafeteria table, or when I asked her to store a binder in the back of her closet. She just nodded and said, "Text me when you have more." Together, without saying the words, we were building an escape hatch. Around that time, Nora brought me a sealed envelope and handed it to me with both hands. "This stays with you," she said. On the front was written in her neat handwriting, "Open on Maddie's 16th birthday." I kept it hidden in the lining of my backpack for months, checking it every night to make sure it hadn't disappeared. Gerald's behavior worsened as his finances grew tighter. He snapped more often, muttered under his breath about bills, and paced the hallway after midnight when he thought no one was awake. Some days he accused me of misplacing things I never touched. Other days he demanded chores that didn't make sense, almost as if he was searching for a reason to explode. Elaine drifted between pretending everything was normal and quietly panicking about money. They didn't know what Nora was preparing, but they sensed something shifting, and the tension inside the house thickened until even Evan avoided the living room. I started keeping a notebook under my mattress where I counted down the days one by one. At first, it felt pointless, like trying to measure time with a cracked hourglass. But as the numbers grew smaller, each mark became a reminder that I wasn't stuck forever. I planned everything with the precision of someone walking a tightrope. Clothes were folded in a way that looked untouched, but the essentials were always ready to grab. My backpack sat zipped and leaning against my dresser, the envelope tucked inside along with a small collection of memories that belonged only to me. Through all of this, Nora updated me whenever she could. One afternoon, she mentioned that the court had assigned an officer to oversee my future petition, a man named Samuel Hayes. She didn't describe him beyond reliable and thorough, but something in her tone made me believe she trusted him completely. Knowing someone like that would review my case felt like a weight shifting, not disappearing, but moving into a place where I could finally breathe. The night before my birthday, the house was silent except for the hum of the heater. Gerald and Elaine were in their room arguing in low whispers about overdue payments. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, rehearsing every step of the morning in my head. Before going to sleep, I slipped my backpack open and checked the envelope one last time. Then I zipped it shut, placed it beside my bed, and told myself that by this time tomorrow I wouldn't be here anymore. This was the last night I'd ever fall asleep under that roof. The moment Gerald ripped open the envelope, the room seemed to tilt. His eyes darted across the first page, an official notice summarizing Nora's investigation into the fraudulent claims he filed under my name. He flipped to the second document and his breath hitched when he saw the signatures from the state office confirming every withdrawal he had taken for years. Then he reached the third page. His face drained completely. It was the temporary guardianship order stamped and signed by a judge authorizing an officer to remove me from the home immediately. "Where did you get this?" he stammered, clutching the papers so tight they crumpled at the edges. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. He tried to grab the envelope back from the counter as if ripping it apart would make everything disappear. Elaine stumbled into the kitchen at the sound of his panicked voice. "What is it, Gerald? What's happening?" He shoved the papers toward her with a trembling hand. She set us up. All of this, she planned it. Elaine scanned the documents and let out a thin, sharp scream that echoed down the hallway. Evan appeared next, stopping short when he saw his parents' faces twisted with panic. None of them looked at me. They were too busy watching their world collapse. I kept my eyes on the window because I knew what was coming next. A dark sedan pulled up in front of the house, calm, steady, deliberate. Gerald followed my gaze. "No," he whispered. "No, they can't." A firm knock on the door cut him off. No one moved, so I did. I walked past them, opened the door, and found a man standing on the porch with a folder tucked under his arm. He was tall, composed, and his expression didn't waver when he looked at me. "Madeline Carter?" he asked. I nodded. "I'm Officer Samuel Hayes with Family Court Services. I'm here under a temporary guardianship order issued this morning." Behind me, Gerald's voice cracked. "She's lying. She forged something. You don't understand what she's capable of." Samuel didn't even look at him. He simply opened the folder and read from the top page, his tone steady. The order authorized him to place me in a safe temporary residence effective immediately. Elaine lunged forward, gripping the back of a chair for balance. "You can't take her. She's ours. She lives here." Samuel lifted his eyes calmly. "Mrs. Carter, the court has reviewed all documentation from the investigation. Any further objections should be directed to your attorney." Evan looked between all of us, confused and pale. "Dad, what's going on?" Gerald ignored him, pointing at me with a shaking hand. This is your doing. You ruined everything. Samuel made a note on his clipboard. Mr. Carter, any statements you make may be added to the case record. I advise you to remain calm. Watching Gerald shrink back felt surreal. For years, he towered over me, his voice shaping every corner of the house. Now he couldn't look Samuel in the eye. I stepped past him without slowing down. My backpack was already slung over my shoulder. Elaine reached out helplessly, but Samuel positioned himself between us with a measured, professional gesture. Madeline, please follow me, he said. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't need to. As I walked out the door, the air felt sharp and clean in a way it never had inside that house. Samuel led me to the car, opened the back door, and waited while I climbed in. I didn't look back. Not at the porch, not at the window, not at the people who spent years convincing me I owed them something. The door shut with a quiet click, and for the first time the silence felt like freedom. The hearing took place on a gray morning that felt heavier than the air outside. Samuel walked me through the courthouse hallway with a calmness that almost steadied my nerves. When the double doors to family court opened, I saw Gerald sitting at the respondent's table, his posture rigid, his jaw locked tight. Elaine sat behind him, clutching a tissue, and Evan stared blankly at the floor. I didn't go near them. I took my seat next to Nora, who whispered, "Just breathe. We're presenting facts, not fighting a battle of opinions." When the judge entered, everyone rose. The hearing began without small talk, without delay. Nora stood first. She placed a binder on the table, opened it, and started with a clear, unwavering tone. Your Honor, for more than 6 years, the respondent Gerald Carter has collected state assistance under the Child Support Subsidy Program. These funds were specifically designated for the care, health, and education of Madeline Carter. She turned a page. During this period, not a single dollar was used for her basic needs. No medical visits, no clothing allowances, no school-related expenses. We have documentation of deposits into Mr. Carter's account totaling over $30,000. The judge nodded for her to continue. Nora then presented the supporting documents, official forms pulled from the state's records, each stamped with date signatures and matching case numbers. She showed photos of items purchased during that same period: car repairs on Gerald's sedan, sports equipment for Evan, and household upgrades unrelated to me. The room stayed painfully quiet. When Nora finished, the judge folded his hands and looked at Gerald. Mr. Carter, would you like to respond? Gerald stood, his voice cracking despite his attempt to steady it. Your Honor, this is exaggerated. We supported her. She had a roof, food, everything she needed. We didn't misuse anything. This is a misunderstanding. Nora didn't interrupt, but the judge lifted a hand. Do you have receipts for expenditures related to Madeline's care? Gerald froze. His mouth opened, then closed again. Well, most of that wasn't documented. We paid things out of pocket. Any proof? The judge repeated. Gerald remained silent. After a moment, the judge turned back to Nora. The evidence you presented appears consistent and complete. He opened the file in front of him and skimmed its contents. Given the documentation of prolonged neglect and financial misuse, the court rules as follows. Elaine gasped before he even finished the sentence. First, all custodial rights previously granted to Gerald and Elaine Carter are revoked immediately. Gerald slumped back into his chair. Second, Mr. Carter is ordered to repay $32,000 in restitution to the state representing misappropriated funds. A payment schedule will be assigned. Failure to comply may result in additional penalties. He flipped another page. Third, restrictions will be placed preventing either adult from contacting Madeline without written approval through family services. Elaine stood abruptly. Please, Your Honor, she's our daughter. She belongs with us. The judge shook his head. The evidence indicates otherwise. Sit down, Mrs. Carter. She collapsed back into her chair, tears streaking her cheeks. Evan looked at me for the first time, confusion and hurt mixed on his face, but I didn't meet his stare. I didn't owe him that. When the hearing adjourned, the bailiff asked everyone to clear the room. As I walked toward the exit beside Nora and Samuel, I passed the waiting area where Elaine and Evan now sat together. Neither of them called my name. Neither tried to speak. For once, the silence between us felt like the truth finally settling into place. I followed Samuel down the hallway, ready for whatever came next, knowing that the part of my life tied to that house was finally officially over. The transition into my new life didn't happen with fireworks or some triumphant soundtrack. It happened quietly in the back seat of Samuel Hayes's sedan as he drove me to the small craftsman-style house he lived in on the edge of town. He wasn't family, not by blood, not by history, but the way he unlocked the front door and stepped aside so I could walk in first made something inside me unclench. "This is temporary," he said gently, "but I want you to feel safe here." I nodded, unsure how to respond to a kindness that didn't demand anything in return. My room was simple, soft blankets, clean sheets, a window that caught the late afternoon light. No shouting in the hallway, no footsteps that made my chest tighten. Samuel didn't hover. He gave me space, made sure I ate, asked how school was going, then let me disappear into silence when I needed it. That alone felt like a luxury I'd never known. Meanwhile, the fallout for the Carters came fast. Gerald lost his job within 2 weeks after the court ruling. The restitution order triggered an audit, and the audit triggered mandatory financial monitoring. Word spread quickly through the company. Fraud was not something people easily overlooked. He had always walked with the confidence of someone who believed he controlled every room he entered. Now, from what the caseworker told Samuel, he barely left the house, terrified of every official letter that arrived. Elaine didn't stay long. She packed a suitcase and left to live with her mother, claiming she needed distance from all this humiliation. Evan moved in with relatives on his side of the family. For the first time in years, the Carter house wasn't packed with noise. It was just another structure on a quiet street with no one left to yell inside it. I didn't think about them often, and when I did, it felt distant, like watching strangers through a window. My life was shifting in ways I couldn't ignore. Samuel helped me schedule therapy sessions, and I met with a counselor named Dr. Rowan every Thursday after school. The first session, I barely spoke. The second session, I cried without understanding why. The third, I talked for almost an hour. Slowly, I learned to recognize the difference between fear and caution, between love and obligation, between survival and living. And as the walls inside me loosened, so did something else: the memory of my mother's family. A small detail in one of Nora's recovered documents had listed a relative, my mother's sister, a name I didn't even know existed. With Samuel's help, I sent a letter. 3 weeks later, I got one back. The handwriting was neat, curved, almost soft. She wrote that she had been searching for me, that she thought I was living overseas with my father's side, that she never knew I had been placed with the Carters. She wanted to meet. I held the letter to my chest and breathed in a way I hadn't breathed in years. One calm Sunday morning, Samuel drove me to a neighborhood of brick houses lined with oak trees. My aunt stood on the porch, hands clasped together, eyes shining in a way that told me she recognized pieces of my mother in my face. She didn't rush toward me. She didn't overwhelm me. She simply opened her arms and waited. I stepped into them, careful at first, then fully. Her home became another safe place I could go after school. She told me stories about my mother I had never heard before. Her laugh, her stubbornness, her way of leaving encouraging notes in every drawer. It stitched something inside me back together. Months passed. Seasons turned. One late afternoon, I stood outside the house Samuel had given me to stay in, looking at its warm lights glowing through the windows. The air felt clean, the silence soft. I thought about everything that had happened, not with bitterness, but with clarity. Blood hadn't saved me. Courage had. The people who shared my last name had tried to silence me. The people who had no obligation to me had lifted me up. I finally understood the truth. Family isn't the place you're born into, but the place where telling the truth never puts you in danger. I let out a slow breath. I'm not going back to the Carter house, I whispered to myself. That place isn't my home. Not anymore. And for the first time, the future didn't feel frightening. It felt possible.